In this video, I'm going to spend some time talking about all of the drones that I own. I'm currently up to 13 drones, and I thought it would be good to start with the first drone that I purchased. This was about 10 years ago, and it's actually what I consider to be a toy class drone. But it's important to talk about toy class drones because it's where most people, especially kids, start, their way into the hobby. It's where they begin. Drones that are like these are usually purchased on Amazon, Target, Walmart, something like that, maybe Best Buy, and they're usually, somewhere under $100. Now with drones, you definitely get what you pay for, and when you pay less than $100 for a drone, you're usually not going to get something that is going to be, too incredible. It's not going to last very long, and it's probably going to be easy to crash, just like this one. This thing actually flies still after 10 years, but it's not very fun to fly compared to FPV drones and all my other things, but you can see the prop guard's a little banged up, and most people's drone experience usually stops when they break their first toy class drone, or when they get it stuck in a tree or they lose it or something like that, and that's where it ends. Unfortunately, that's sad because, a lot more people could be into this hobby if they can get over that hump. And I think the best way to do that is to never get these in the first place. Maybe start with something that is $200, like a Mini 2, or some other kind of cheaper or used offering from a more reputable drone manufacturer like DJI or Holy Stone or some of the others that are out there that are undoubtedly better than what you get with these cheap toy class drones that just aren't designed to last very long. Fortunately for me, I stuck with it after this and then graduated to the original DJI Mavic Air. I don't have that drone anymore, but I'm going to go over the rest that I have now to show you where my drone journey kind of took me. So the next drone that I'm going to talk about is the first FPV drone that I built. I built this with the help of a friend, and he had obviously been flying before I got into FPV drone, and he knew how to build. So with his help, I ordered a bunch of parts and I put it together with him. This is a 4S 5-inch freestyle kind of build, and it's built on the Armatan Marmot frame. And there's really nothing too special about this other than the fact that this thing is an absolute tank. I've found over the years of flying this that it can withstand just about anything I throw at it or anything I throw it into. And as you'll see in some of the videos that I'll link here, this thing has gone through it and has become essentially my beater drone. This thing, when I first started flying it, I obviously babied it. I was afraid of, hitting anything, landing too hard, whatever, because I didn't want to break it because it was my baby, my only drone. But after flying it for hours and hours and hours, and then eventually, years, I've learned that this thing can absolutely take it. So it's still an absolute blast to fly this thing, and I'm going to be featuring it in several videos to come. And if you're wondering, the cage up front is for a Hero 5 session camera. So let's talk about the next one. The next drone I want to mention here is my next custom freestyle, this is actually a racing FPV style drone with a bottom mount 6S battery. This drone's capable of over 100 miles per hour, and it's lightning fast. And this thing absolutely screams. I'll throw a link to this and of course any other videos that I have as I'm talking about these. I'll throw cards up for you if you want to check out the footage or any kind of feature video that I have that features these drones. This thing with a battery weighs under 500 grams. One of my lightest 6S packs, I think the total comes to around 475 grams with the battery on there, which is incredibly light. You can see it's a very thin arm design on this, but it's still pretty strong. I've never really crashed this thing, thankfully, because I don't think it could withstand as much as my 4S build, but I have had props disintegrate in midair during a really high-speed bank. Just another testament to how fast this thing actually is. And this is by far my fastest drone, and again, a ton of fun to fly this thing. Next up, let's talk about my first Cinelog quad. Now this was the first bind and fly drone that I purchased. This is the Pavo 30 from BETAFPV. It is a, let's see here, like a 3-inch, I guess. And this thing, when I first got it, the whole purpose was, to do some indoor work. you can see it has a GoPro mount. I ended up putting the SMO 4K camera up front here because it's, you know, kind of one of those naked cameras, nice and lightweight. This drone is capable of carrying a full-size GoPro, but it didn't fly well. I will say this drone flies like crap in the wind, but for indoor flight, this got the job done, and it enabled me to film my first one-shot FPV drone video or whatever. So I'll throw a link up for that one so you can check it out. And at the time, I was very, very pleased with this thing. It wasn't until I graduated to a couple other better drones that I realized that this isn't as good as I originally thought it was. But I still keep it around for a couple odds and ends. If I ever want to do a drone video featuring a whoop with, you know, protected props that I'm going to be flying in a little more of a risky fashion, I'll use this one so I don't risk my more favorite or better preferred drones. So that's the Pavo 30 from BETAFPV. Next up, I got my first small drone shortly after the Pavo 30. This is the iFlight Alpha A85. It's a very small drone, and again, it's got the covered props, so great for indoor flying. This thing is super small, and the reason that I got this is because at the time when I purchased this, I believe it was the smallest digital FPV drone that money could buy, or at least the smallest digital bind and fly. So this still hooks up with my, you know, the goggles and everything, and I don't fly any analog, by the way. I do have one analog drone that I'll be talking about at the end here, but the idea of flying with a digital signal, something this small that could, you know, thread the needle, really small gaps, is really intriguing to me. And I had a lot of fun with this thing, and every once in a while I do bring it out for just, you know, extra fun, you know, flying through really tight spaces. And one interesting purpose that I used this one for was practice runs. If I'm running an indoor route, say for a one-shot kind of video, I might run the route with this drone first to get a lay of the land. This drone being so light, impacts don't hit as hard. It's not going to be as susceptible to damage. It doesn't have a brittle frame. It's actually very, very bendy. It even has a carbon fiber bracing to kind of keep this thing nice and rigid. So I'll fly the route with this a couple times to kind of get my bearings before I run the route with a heavier drone that has a GoPro on it or something, for example. So there it is, the Alpha A85. Throw a couple links up to this in case you wanted to see some of the footage featuring this drone. Next, I moved on to another bind and fly. This was my first bind and fly for a 5-inch drone. This is the Nazgul Evoque 6S from iFlight. This drone was, I will admit, an impulse splurge purchase. I didn't need this drone. I still don't need this drone, but I was very enticed by the build quality of this thing, the integrated lighting, the covered sides. So all the componentry on the inside is covered with this injection molded plastic. It's a very high-end, high-quality build on this. iFlight did a fantastic job with this drone. And on top of all of that, it's so fast. This drone, I've clocked it around 80 miles an hour, and that's with a 1300 milliamp hour battery on the back. So you probably could go closer to 90 or even possibly 100 if you get a really light pack on there. But a ton of fun to fly this. This is the drone that I was flying when I attempted to fly FPV while laying down. That didn't go well, and I haven't tried it since because I'm kind of afraid of doing that again. It really threw me for a loop. But that was this drone, and that was the only time I crashed this thing. And I was not very excited about that because it was the first time it got scratched. But again, just like a lot of these other drones, most FPV drones are much more durable than you think, and they can take it usually, unless you have a really unfortunate impact where you hit a bar or something and crack your DVR lens or your FPV camera. Okay, so really not much else to say about this other than that, oh yeah, it's got the Deadcat design. So if you look at the frame for this thing, it had that Deadcat design, and the reason for that is when you attach a GoPro to the prongs here, you don't get any of the props in view of the GoPro unless you're in like hyper view or super view mode or something like that. But sometimes I like that, but it is nice to have that option if I'm looking to get more cinematic footage and I don't want to have props in view. This frame allows me to do that without having to crop in editing. That is the Nazgul Evoque. All right, next up is what is now and still my favorite FPV drone. This is the GEPRC Cinelog 35. It's another Cinewhoop, and it is my favorite. This is a 6S powerhouse. The reason this drone is my favorite, there are many reasons. I'm gonna go over all of those. Number one, it can hold a full-size GoPro if you want. I have the 11 Mini on here, but it can take a larger payload than that and fly just fine. But with that camera on there and all the weight for the battery, the camera and everything, this thing flies like an absolute dream. It is so stable, so smooth, and it just doesn't really seem to be affected by wind that much at all. So it is an absolute blast to fly. This is my new favorite drone for doing indoor flying, especially one-take kinds of things, virtual tours or whatever, fly-through tours of businesses, whatever. This is the drone that I'm going for the final, final run, final take. And now I recently upgraded this thing to DJI's 03 camera system. So not only does it capture amazing footage with the GoPro, but it's also giving me amazing footage to my goggles with that improved camera sensor from the 03. So this thing is an absolute powerhouse. With 6S power, it's fast, it can be fun, and you can even freestyle with this if you want to. So it's kind of an all-around drone that doesn't have many drawbacks. The only real drawback to this was the frame, or I guess the duct guards here. They're pretty brittle. So if you happen to wreck this, usually you're gonna break something. I've now replaced the duct guards. It's kind of a two-piece system, a left and a right. And I've had to replace it twice now, and the impacts weren't even that bad. One time I kind of just landed on grass and there was like a rock somewhere nearby and I dropped from about 4 feet, and it was enough to cause, a fracture that I had to replace it then. Overall, fantastic drone. If you're looking for a Cinewhoop drone or anything, I would recommend getting the V2 version of this. It's just a newer version essentially. Absolutely worth it, and you'll have to just experience it for yourself to see how well this thing flies. Next up, we're going to talk about the 25. This is another one from GEPRC. This is a Cinelog 25, which is just a smaller version essentially of the 35. I got this drone, and this is another one that I would throw into that splurge category. I knew I didn't need it at the time, but I was intrigued. The reason that I was intrigued by this one, I saw a lot of other guys flying on YouTube with this, doing house tours and things like that, and it has a smaller footprint. It's got padded, propeller guards there, so if you happen to bump into something, it's not going to be as brittle, although I did break this one too the same way. And it can still carry a GoPro, but not necessarily a full-size GoPro, at least not as easily. It's not meant for that. But I threw my 10 Bones on here, which I had. This is the GoPro Hero 10 Bones, which is essentially a naked, stripped-down version of the full-size Hero 10, and it weighs like 65 grams or something like that, and it is still a very capable camera, even though the 11s are out. This thing is awesome. It's just a lot more susceptible to damage because it doesn't have all the extra components to, act as armor. So this drone is fun to fly. It's another one of the drones that I take through really tight spaces, but mainly this one I only fly for fun now, and I don't really use this for any business or professional commercial stuff. But I could do that if I had to, or if I needed a backup drone. So this is what I'd call my next best option if I were on a shoot and my 35 stopped working for some reason, or I crashed it. This would be the next one that I would reach for, and of course I would have it with me for that very reason. So that's the Cinelog 25. All right, next. I told someone in the comments, someone who had originally asked for this video, that I wouldn't spend too much time on the DJI drones because it is so overdone on YouTube. So I'm just going to very briefly mention my kind of story with these, and I won't spend too much time. But anyway, the DJI FPV, here it is, the chungus of the drones. This is my wife's drone. I kind of told her, they would be a great drone for you to fly and we can go do it together. And she kind of went for that idea. I feel kind of bad because she flew it one time. She liked the idea of us having, a common interest in something that I'm obviously passionate about. and she's still happy for me, but I can tell this drone flying is not really her thing. But I still have this drone for whatever reason. I fly this very infrequently, but when I do, it's always kind of fun and neat. And I don't know, it is what it is, and this thing is essentially a novelty, but it's interesting, I'll call it. There it is, the DJI FPV. And next up, we got the Avata. Yeah, everyone's also least favorite FPV drone. I kind of bought into the hype with this one. I've actually used this for a couple commercial shoots. I have the Bad Idea mount on the top there. You can find that linked usually on like Etsy or something. And you can put a full-size GoPro and you get tons of jello, especially if you're flying outside. But it is another kind of backup that I have. The one thing that I want to mention about this, that the reason that this drone can actually outperform some of these for more cinematic flight is the way that you can maintain altitude. So if you have it in normal or sport mode, we're not talking full manual or acro or anything like that, the drone will maintain consistent altitude and you can just kind of, throttle forward and you can get some really neat shots that way. You can kind of keep the drone out of danger. You don't have to constantly be adjusting the altitude or trying to maintain manually. So I was able to get a video flying over water pretty low with this drone with the GoPro on its back because of that. And yeah, I could have done that same thing with one of these other drones, but I think you would have seen that the drone would have been going up and down a little bit because I can't maintain the robotic altitude maintenance that this thing is capable of. So it's interesting, and I keep it around. Kind of a backup at this point, and it's one that if my kids ever want to start flying drones, that's one that I might have them dabble with. Okay, and next we are up to the other DJI drones I have. So let's go now to the Mavic 3. This is the OG Mavic 3. This is the one that originally came out. It's not the classic, it's not the newly released Pro. And this was kind of a gift to myself after I passed my Part 107, drone certification exam. So then I was able to legally do commercial work with drones, and I wanted something that I can fly and get aerial photos, aerial video that wasn't FPV. This is not my favorite way of flying, but I wanted a drone that was very capable. And this is, one of the best drones around today for that purpose. Yeah, the Pro is better, and the newly released Air 3 is super impressive and very comparable to this thing actually for like half the price. But it is still awesome. And the way this thing shoots in night mode, it shoots it up to 5K and a little above that, 5.2K or whatever it is. And the image quality, video, photo, it's impeccable. It's beautiful. And I'm always impressed every time I fly this thing. And just with the capabilities of it. I'm not gonna get into all of that. I'm just kind of telling you why I have this thing. There it is, that's the Mavic 3. Next. This is one of the newer ones. One of my newest drones, actually. This is the Mini 3 Pro. The Mini 3 Pro is super capable and super small. This thing shoots 4K, 60, amazing image quality, and has that vertical shooting option. But it's pretty awesome what this thing's capable of, but the most enticing feature for this is how small it is. You fit it in your pocket, and you can get amazing footage on the go. So this is my travel drone. This is one that's usually gonna go with me if I'm, hiking, or if I'm, going on vacation. I can't take too much, stuff, and I can't bring all these or whatever. Right, and last but not least is this chunky guy here. This is an interesting one that kind of fell into my possession. This is the Lumenier QAV400, I believe is the name of this one. This was a kit drone FPV analog that was purchased through my work for a student. I work at a high school, and there's a student who built this thing back in 2016, I believe, pretty much the dawn of FPV, long before I was able to get into it, before I even really knew about it. And this thing is huge. You can see the size of this. I'll put it next to a 5-inch. So this is a 5-inch freestyle, and this is the QAV400 drone. Absolute beast, monster of a drone with just gigantic props here. And I flew this once. I flew it line of sight. since I don't have any analog equipment, I wasn't able to fly it, but I actually did get a little creative. I threw the Alpha A85 and taped it to it and used that digital feed to fly this thing FPV. I don't have a video created for that, but if you're interested in seeing that, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll take some time to produce some more footage featuring this gargantuan FPV drone. So that's really all I have to say about this one. It's kind of just a showpiece now, it just hangs on a wall. It's cool looking, but if you're interested in seeing that, let me know. All right, so there you have it, all 13 of my drones. I don't have any plans in the immediate future anyway to purchase another one. I have had my eye on the new BETAFPV Pavo Pico. That really caught my attention with the really lightweight size. I think it's under 200 grams and it has the DJI 3. So to have, you know, a digital feed that high of quality with that great of a camera that can really get into tiny spaces, that intrigues me. We'll see. If I had to buy another drone today, that's what it would be. But if you are just getting into FPV and looking for which drone to buy, a little piece of advice for me is I would go with something small. Something small like the Alpha A85 from iFlight or whatever the newest version of this would be my recommendation for a couple reasons. This thing is durable and it's lightweight, so it's not going to hit hard, and it's got flex, it's not brittle. So you won't find yourself breaking this unless you really trash it. And it flies exactly the same, at least with the controls and the sticks, as, you know, a 5-inch. So this is the drone that I would recommend. And it's also not as expensive as some of these larger drones. So pick one of these up to help you learn how to fly after, of course, you've done the simulator. But it'll work well. And if you're wondering my goggles setup, I use the DJI goggles Integra. I have a couple videos featuring these. I'll throw links up. But I definitely would recommend these unless you have a huge nose, because it can get a little uncomfortable. That's it. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you found this video entertaining or informative or whatever, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me out. I have lots of new stuff coming down the pike, lots of new ideas, and I'll be using all of these drones for all of that good stuff coming. So thanks for stopping by, and I appreciate you watching.